Hi, good morning, everyone. So, welcome. Here today, we're talking about meeting students' sensory needs with universal design. My name is Iris Warchall, and this is Maisie. I'm a physical therapist who specializes in supporting autistic people and other neurodivergent people with many of the health conditions that are more prevalent among these populations. I also teach continuing education courses for healthcare professionals and other professionals on how we can work through a neurodiversity affirming lens in order to best support people across the lifespan. I'm one of the many late identified autistic people who discovered that I was autistic after I had a child who received an autism diagnosis. So that experience led me to connect with the autistic community and learn quite a bit about how to best support my own needs. As a result, many chronic health conditions that I had been managing, I was able to really dramatically improve. And all of this was due to learning about, for example, how can I best meet my sensory needs? How can I pace my activities in order to arrange my environment in a way that works best for me? And this is a part of why I got into teaching other professionals how we can be working to support our neurodivergent people that we work with, because supporting people in figuring these things out and creating environments in which people have what they need in order to really thrive and do well is a huge part of what every helping professional needs to know, no matter what age group that we work with or regardless of our specific profession.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Maisie Soetantyo, and I am a longtime professional who has been working with autistic children for about 30 years. So I started actually back at UCLA as an undergraduate, and I studied under the founder of ABA. So that means I'm like old because that's how I got started when they were running the Young Autism Project. And after doing behavioral programs for about 12 years, I switched gear to get trained on a relationship-based model. And at our clinic, we support parents and professionals to figure out how to best support neurodivergent people, not just specific to autistic people. I watch my clients grow up, and some of them managed to finish college with hard work, and they couldn't even get a summer job at Domino's, even though they eat and make pizza every day, you know, or chicken nuggets. So in 2019, I created a nonprofit called Autism Career Pathways. And because I really want to share autistic and neurodivergent people's story and show the world that meaningful employment looks different for everyone. I love helping autistic people with complex supports needs to build their homegrown business, and also showing the world, our community, that quality of lives look very different for each individual. I am also a parent of 2 neurodivergent young adults. I was diagnosed with autism level 1 very late. I also have number dyslexia, dyscalculia, auditory and sensory processing disorder. School was very hard for me. It was very hard. It was a survival mode. for me. So today I am an inclusivity trainer, and I design curriculum for professionals and parents and workplaces, and help everyone to move away from a deficit model and learn how to help each other to do the best that we can with different neurotypes, different kinds of mind. Do the next. Okay, so this is the objective for today, but the main thing that Iris and I want to do this morning is to create a little bit of time for all of us here to learn and ask questions. And this is a safe place for you to ask any questions, because Iris and I have our own lived experiences as neurodivergent people. We were students before. We're also parents of neurodivergent kids. So if you have any questions, you can ask us now or send us an email later. So we're going to talk about universal design principles, and we're going to talk about what is autism and what is not. We're going to talk about sensory needs and without using deficit-based language. So in our presentation today, we will be modeling just use a positive language in very clear and detailed ways without using terms like disorder. We're going to go over problematic classroom behaviors and reframe that. Sensory communication, executive functioning, and movement or motor needs. And we're going to give you some practical ideas about how to empower students, neurodivergent students, through accessible classroom support, which actually works very similarly for workplaces as well. So identify inclusive sensory design strategies to use in the classroom. We've got pictures, we have resources for you later. And how to engage in affirming conversations with students, neurotypical or neurodivergent, about just basic human needs and sensory communication, employment. Those are basic human needs. It doesn't matter what neurotype you have. Okay, so I think.
So as we're talking about sensory universal design today, let's take a moment to make sure that we're all on the same page, thinking about the concept of universal design more generally. So when we're talking about universal design, we're talking about setting up environments in a way that is going to work as well as possible for as many people as possible. And central to thinking about universal design is going to be remembering that each individual person out there, each individual student, is going to have their own unique set of conditions in which they are going to be able to best access their learning environment. Because of this, inherent to universal design is the idea that we need to have flexibility in the way the environments can be used, in the way that people can be accessing what they're doing. When we work to make environments work as well as possible for as many people as possible, we are inherently making our learning environments more equitable. When we're talking about universal design for learning, or UDL, then we're talking about providing students with multiple means of representation of their learning material. We're talking about providing multiple means of engagement with learning material. And we're also talking about providing multiple means in which students can express their learning and show what they've learned. All of these different areas in which different options are provided as part of UDL inherently have a sensory component to them. So for example, when we're talking about multiple ways to engage with learning material, we're thinking about there can be different options for how students might be accessing self-regulation tools as part of their learning experience. And we'll talk about that. We're going to be thinking about how we can be presenting information in ways that have multiple different options for their sensory representation. So for example, right now, as I'm delivering auditory information, we also have some visuals that are going along with that. That can also mean including things like manipulatives for students who have a learning style in which tactile input is part of how they learn. All of this is working towards the goal of helping students to become expert learners. Oh, that's still my slide. So why is sensory UDL so important? The answer is because it is not at all uncommon for any given student to have sensory needs that are outside the norm. It's estimated that about 1 in 7 people are neurodivergent in one way or another, meaning that they have some difference in their neurocognitive functioning style that's outside the norm. Many of the most common styles of or types of neurodivergence that are seen among students, such as autism and ADHD, have sensory differences as part of the picture. But there are going to be many students who have some amount of difference in their sensory processing who are not going to necessarily carry a specific diagnosis. A lot of these students who are going to benefit from sensory UDL are not going to be flagged as such. And so this is why it's so important that we're thinking about setting up learning environments in ways where each student is able to best access what they want and need to do.
Okay, so to also add to the numbers, the facts that we saw on the slide, I would like to add that 85%, over 80% of autistic college graduate in America are not working or underemployed. So the sensory piece is so huge because we don't know what we don't know. As autistic individuals, as educators, as parents, which is why today's topic is very important. Now let's talk about autistic experiences and how that those conditions it really impact an autistic person's just everything, daily living, our lifestyle, the clothes we wear, where we can engage in social relationships. So when you are autistic or neurodivergent, your sensory processing is calibrated differently. So compared to neurotypical people. So I'll use myself as an example. I am very sensitive to sounds and voices. So I could hear people talking from the back part of my house, for example. And my kids say, "Oh, mommy, you have super hearing." I said, or they will say, "How did you know that?" because I could hear them. And I have problems filtering out complex information. So if you're talking to me and there's a background sound, whatever that may be, I wouldn't be able to process it, right? So your sensory differences really affect the way you're able to process information. Now, information for me as a college student at UCLA was very difficult because large classrooms, people coming in and out, people clicking their pen, the professors talking down there. You know, I used to think that, to be a good student, you have to like listen to the professor, take notes, and flip through your textbook. So the entire time I was in class, I worked hard not to understand, but to mimic what everyone else was doing, because I thought that that's what you're supposed to do. But when you ask me at the end of each class, you know, what did you learn, or what stood out to you, I would not be able to answer that. What saved me at UCLA was that students were able to purchase notes, and the notes were very good. And I had to spend extra time after school to catch up. You know, I didn't realize that it was not normal for someone to spend, like, you come home, you crash, take a nap, or sleep in the car, and then by like 4 a.m., you know, my eyes would pop open, and just out of anxiety that what I have learned is not enough, you know. So the input and output is very different. Now, if you know about the spoons theory, the theory that every human being has certain amount of battery unit to be able to function, right? So if everything is fine and dandy, you might have, say, 10 battery unit in the morning, and you'll be able to finish everything throughout the day, right? Now, the poor neurodivergent students, they often have maybe 50% in the morning because they can't sleep the night before, or maybe they have chronic pain, or they have anxiety. So they have all these things playing in their head at 12 o'clock, trying to think about, did I do a good job today or not? Right? So that's what happens. When you have low bandwidth, can you push through it through the day? Yes, you can. But that means it's like a rubber band. It's like you're stretching beyond your means, and then it's going to snap. That's how it feels for many neurodivergent students. If you're autistic with ADHD like myself, the distraction comes from sensory stimuli, all the lights, the sounds, the smell of other people. There's really nothing you can do about it, right? And also internally, from the constant pop-up bubbles, like thought bubbles. It's just like that. So it's a double whammy. So it's calibrated differently, the sensory processing, either you're hyper or hypo, but it's really never just the right amount to be able to process information so that we can respond to others accordingly. You may see some of your students just acting very frustrated every day, because maybe it's 10 in the morning, but they've gone through so many little things throughout that morning to tolerate the challenges, to listen and try to keep up. There are a lot of bandwidth stealers in the classroom because it's just not designed for sensory differences. So what is autism, as well as other types of neurodivergence? It's a diagnosis of neurological differences. So the easy way to explain to your students, it's like apples and oranges. They're both fruits, but you look at them closely, they're small variations, right? They taste different. So, or You can use the analogy of some people prefer iPhones, some people prefer Android phone, Samsung phone. Yeah, the function is the same, but you need the right kind of manual to be able to use these two devices, different brands, optimally. So I think right now we just don't have a good manual to help people with different neurotypes to meet in the middle. I use this to parents a lot, that autistic people just have a different developmental trajectory. So it means it goes in a parallel way. So autistic minds cannot be neurotypical. I came from multiple generations of autistic people, for sure, because we're very similar in the way that we stim. We started communicating verbally very, very late. We just have a different developmental trajectory, and we will get there when we get there, which is my experience also learning to drive. I did it later. I got my master's degree when I was 40 years old. Eventually, I got there. And okay, so information processing, if you have low bandwidth, you're also going to need more time to process information. So the more adults repeat themselves when you think that students are not paying attention, when you ask or make a request and they're processing, it's like on the computer, you see the thing that going around and around, it's like that. And then when you're thinking, oh, maybe the student didn't hear me, let me repeat myself. That's actually adding more chaos, because then the student have to restart again. Autistic people just have a different culture, different way of living, different way to connect with others. Autistic play is just a different kind of play. It's not weird. It serves a very important function. Oh, I have one more. Okay. So what autism and other neurodivergences are not, is a deficit, disorder, a lesser version, a disease, or a charity case. We are not autistic adults who like to tone police people. When we don't know if somebody prefer to say, I have autism versus I'm autistic, the best practice is to ask the person, right? If you're writing an article, use both, for example, or go with what most autistic people prefer. But when it comes to these specific ones, I can tell you that employment is very difficult because workplaces think, well, it's not that we don't want to hire autistic people. We know they're very talented, but they're going to take so much time for us to be able to onboard and teach them how to do this stuff. The thinking that neurodivergent people, it's just not worth being given opportunities to be able to work authentically as themselves. So we like to put people in boxes. The moment that diagnoses come, those boxes get smaller and smaller as you get older, because people expect more out of you. And the same goes at workplaces. So when you're using a different kind of narrative, vocabularies, and don't use this, your neurodivergent students will also not use these to describe themselves. It's not so much what we say, but also our mindset, because our mindset dictates how we look at our students, right? So, okay.
Part of sensory UDL is addressing some of these factors that lead to neurodivergent students having that 50% battery that they're working with in the first place. Okay, so by incorporating sensory UDL, we are helping to address some of these inequities that Maisie was just talking about. One goal of sensory UDL is to be creating environments in which all students have what they need in order to be regulated and ready to learn. Now, to be regulated means to have your internal state match what's needed for you to do what you're trying to do. So regulated does not necessarily mean calm and quiet. One student who is going to be working on learning a certain skill may very well look calm and quiet when they're ready to learn. The student next to them may be a completely different person, and they may be bouncing up and down when they're ready to learn. Both students are regulated. Now, all of us can think of different times in our lives when we have been dysregulated, meaning when we had our internal state not match up with what we needed in order to do what we would like to do. You can think of, for example, when you're feeling slow going in the morning and you're having trouble getting up the energy to do a workout that you are intending to do. Or maybe there have been times when you're feeling amped up and fidgety, and it's hard to concentrate on the task that's in front of you. These are both examples of dysregulation. And all of us go back and forth between regulated and dysregulated throughout the day. No one is regulated 100% of the time, and 100% regulation is therefore not the goal, right? But we do want to be creating environments in which our students have what they need in order to be regulated. Now, when we see our neurodivergent students doing some sort of fidgeting, or if they're stimming, meaning to do some sort of activity that's giving them a sensory input that helps them to be regulated, to have their internal state match up with what they need to do, okay, that's functional, okay? So as I'm touching this thing that I have in my hand here, this is giving me tactile input that's helping me to stay focused on presenting information to you right now. When I'm shifting my weight from foot to foot, side to side, forward and back, that's giving my body proprioceptive input. So I'm feeling where my body is in space, and that's helping me to feel grounded. Now, if a student is existing in a sensory environment or entering a sensory environment where things are really not in line with their own personal sensory needs. So say, for example, you have a student who is very sensitive to bright lights, to noise, then if that student is neurodivergent, they may wind up having a meltdown. Meltdowns happen when a person's processing system is overloaded, when you have that Android phone that is trying to run an app that is not built for it. Now, say you have a student who has been pushing themselves to exist in a sensory environment that does not work well for them for a long, long stretch. We're talking weeks or months or maybe even years. Then that student might start to go into neurodivergent burnout, which is when you might see your students start to become more irritable, more sensitive to different stimuli. You might see the students start to appear to lose skills that they had previously mastered. Okay, so when we're seeing what we might think is a regression, that is often actually a sign of burnout, that a student's system has been overloaded with too much that is not a good fit for them for too long. And so when we're thinking about sensory UDL and providing spaces that allow for regulation, opportunities for regulation, then we're helping to set things up so that we can prevent these types of adverse outcomes for students. So we're going to be pulling up a video here of some sensory experiences that we wanted to show you.
This was a video given to me by parents of these two cute twins during their first year. So as you're watching this short video, I would like you to imagine that you're in the room as one of these boys, and as well as, imagine yourself when you have this many sensory input coming to you, streaming very fast, that what you have to filter out. So because we have a very unique and different sensory processing ability, we also have to work very hard to filter out unimportant information, right? So as you see, we often think that our students are not paying attention or not responsive when they're actually in their minds, they're trying to sort through all the sensory stimuli, the sensory information, and filter out the ones that you don't need to be able to focus on the most important thing in the moment. So one of these twins is a neurotypical baby, and the other one was later diagnosed with autism. So I'll just let the video play. Okay. So which of these two boys have autism? Right. 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 Correct. Yeah. He was processing. So think about it this way. 80% of human beings are neurotypical, and 20%, as we know it, are neurodivergent, but maybe that is actually not accurate. More neurodivergent people. So it's a ratio difference as well. So if you're in the room with these two little babies, I think you will definitely feel and see the difference in the way the autistic boy responded, right? It wasn't actually wrong. It was just different, right? So if you come from another country to, let's say you went on a holiday to Japan, you don't speak the language, but you had time to prepare yourself to learn about Japanese culture, the food, you bookmark many things. Oh, sorry. But it doesn't matter how much you prepare yourself when you go to a foreign country. It's still difficult. There are communication breakdowns, but it's still possible for you to, yeah, thank you. But it's still possible for you to speak to a Japanese person and you and the person don't speak each other's language. It might take you longer to connect and understand each other's intention. But because you're on the same page, you will find a way to help each other understand what's needed, what's the intention, right? You may use your body language. Maybe you use Google Translator. You find workarounds, right? So I would like you to be able to hopefully think about communication of autistic students' communication differently. It's not that it's wrong. It just feels very different because we have a different engine, right? So think about it, right? That goes with eye gaze also. Using eye gaze, I let that go after I knew I was autistic, and I found that I can preserve my bandwidth longer when I actually look away. So eye gaze aversion is actually part of a natural human communication. Babies do that. That's how parents know that it's time to shift their peekaboo game or something when babies look away and also turn their body in a different way, right? So babies are already expert in using nonverbal communication channels. And yet, autistic people, just because they have the diagnosis of autism, our use of eye gaze is constantly being looked at as progress or no progress. So here's the thing. Would you like do you prefer autistic students to be able to understand a conversation? Because if you prefer for them to understand and be able to reciprocate, they have to let go of the eye contact, right? So if you work with autistic students, in fact, you have to tell them, you don't have to look at me when we speak. Do what feels comfortable for you. Autistic people know how to use eye contact. They do that naturally when they want to share their experiences with people that have trust with. But that's really with everyone, right? So qualitatively, we just use our communication channels differently because we just have different engines. Is it my turn? Still? Oh, okay. Still my turn. Okay. So now we're going to talk about challenging behaviors. We talked a little bit about inattentive behaviors or what we consider learning readiness, right? So I am very fidgety, and I love how today we get to stand and move because it's much harder for me to do a Zoom presentation when I have to sit still, right? So when autistic people need movement to regulate, and they're expected to sit in the classroom or at work for long periods of time, that's a bandwidth stealer. It's hard, right? Now, as I described earlier, like a rubber band, you keep stretching it because you are in the environment that's not designed for you as a neurodivergent people, and then it snaps. So in neurodivergent people, this may look like sensory overwhelm, panic attacks, sensory burnout, right? So people who experience panic attack, a lot of times you think that it's like tantruming or they're just completely losing it, right? Because they are at the end of the rope. There's nothing else, zero battery power. So in that moment, whatever you already teach the students, how to manage or self-regulate or get your calm back, they're not able to access all that in the moment. It's inaccessible, right? So when we think about how to support students who experience a lot of frustration, we really have to think about the whys. Figure out the sensory profiles. If you work with non-speaking students, then bring in the whole team, bring in occupational therapists on the team, bring in the parents, compare and contrast information, because there are triggers and sometimes they're quite obvious. For some of my clients, it's just listening to pots and pans banging in the kitchen or a dog barking. It feels very painful for them, right? So reframe the challenging behaviors by doing the detective work and figuring out the right profile and the reasons why. Because we can't fix the problems for our students, for our children, because they need to be able to problem solve on their own. So an example of this would be if a student is very light sensitive, right? And the whole day they already like work hard to like squint. I was a squinter before, or students who like to wear hoodies. Their hoodies are always up. It's because they have wide peripheral vision and it's very distracting. And that's why they cover their face, for example. Or you see students who squint a lot or doing this. It's because they're protecting their eyes because they're very light sensitive, right? So these kind of actions or stimming, they serve a very important function for the neurodivergent person. They're not only their coping mechanism, it's also a way for them to protect themselves, right? So these little things, I think, empower your students. So, oh, it looks like the light is too bright today, you know, so then you got the student to switch off the light. A dimmer is great, a light dimmer, but unfortunately dimmers also make sound, so that doesn't work for me. So let's think about the barriers that are always there and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Noise, smell, brightness. Did I miss anything else? Energy demands. You know, Iris was talking about a mismatch. So a lot of tantrums, meltdowns, it's actually triggered by low bandwidth and a mismatch of your energy availability to the expectations of the job, right? And everyone is different. They have different degrees. Expectations, task completions, performance, you know, so it's always there are different degrees, different kinds of mismatches. But the bigger it is, then of course you'll see bigger emotional expressions. And sometimes, as long as the person is safe and you're safe, there's really nothing you can do but acknowledge and be available and just give that person space because that steam needs to be let out. I think that's it.
And, this is just illustrating some of what Maisie was mentioning, that what we see externally when a student is dysregulated is not always going to be the most useful information for us to consider when we're trying to problem solve and help set up the student's environment so that they have what they need in order to be doing well. A student can, on the outside, be appearing aggressive. They might be running away. These are fight or flight kind of responses because their nervous system has become very dysregulated. They've been overloaded. And so it's always getting to these underlying reasons that is what's going to be most productive in helping students to access their education. So let's talk about what we can be doing in order to set up our classroom environments, or whatever environments that we might be working with people in order to make them as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. We can be thinking first about things like the physical configuration of our spaces. So, for example, is there a quiet space in the room that students can go to if needed to regulate, or if they even just do their best work in that quieter area? We can be thinking about this, especially for those students who might be more like that infant that we had seen on the left, who obviously becomes very overloaded with all of that sensory input coming in. That kid, when he grows up and he's in a school environment, is going to benefit from having that quieter area in which he can work. Thinking about when information is being presented to a group. For those students who need to be moving around more while they're learning, then are there ways we can set up the space so that those students can be in a part of the classroom where they can be moving? And can we have those students who would be overwhelmed by seeing the visual input of their peers moving about? Can they be in a place that's closer to the teacher or whoever is delivering the information so that they also have what they need? Generally, minimizing distractions. So, for example, finding ways to block out noise from the hallway or from the street, whether that's thinking of acoustic tiling or even using a white noise machine at times. We can be thinking of ways to minimize bright lighting, even for fluorescent lights like this. These are so common in the spaces that we work and learn in. And also, they're very dysregulating for a lot of people. You can get covers that help to filter the light and make our environments more accessible. For students who need tactile input to regulate, keeping baskets of fidget items in different spaces around the room can be really helpful. And we have, some examples of different things here. I'm holding something that I can squish. We have, some things that allow people to move around different pieces that lock together. We can have putty, poppers. All of these things should be accessible to all students. UDL means setting things up in a way where different options for engaging with the learning experience are easy to access. These are not things that students should have to ask for or have in closed cabinets. Of course, part of UDL is going to include having multiple sensory means of representation of information. We talked about that already. And most of us are familiar with how things like visual schedules are very helpful for a lot of students. in order to stay organized and in order to prepare for transitioning from activity to activity throughout the day. One thing that I'd like to highlight can be a part of UDL relating to visual schedules is that we can be creating personalized schedules for all of our students, and we can be including in these schedules reminders for students to do what they need to do to regulate. So that could be, for example, for a middle school student, a reminder in those transitional moments between classes to take a moment to step to a quieter space, to take a breath, to stim, whatever they need to, before they move on to their next activity. A lot of neurodivergent students have differences in the way they process and interpret internal bodily sensory information. So things like hunger, thirst, bathroom needs. And so including on these personalized schedules, reminders to take care of those bodily needs is a part of sensory UDL. Now, many children and adults perceive and comprehend information best while they are moving. And movement is a regulation tool that should be available to all students. I don't know if anyone here has a child who enjoys or has enjoyed My Little Pony, but my daughter loved My Little Pony for a good several years. And there was one of these episodes that really well highlighted how some people or ponies need to move in order to learn best. So we had this Pegasus named Rainbow Dash who was studying for an exam, and she could not concentrate on the material. She was having all of her friends try and help her out with showing study strategies like flashcards and making up songs, and just none of it was working for her. And so she was really frustrated. And she decides to go on a fly with one of her friends. She's a Pegasus, right? I mentioned that. She has wings, she can fly around. And so as she is flying and, telling her friend she's feeling really down about herself, she feels dumb, she can't learn, her friend notices that when Rainbow's flying, she takes in and memorizes everything that she sees on the ground below her. So what did they do? They set up the information that she needed to learn down on the ground. She could fly around while seeing it. She learned it and she aced the test. So we have a lot of Rainbow Dash type students who are out there, right? And thinking about then what we can do to meet the needs of these, meet the needs of these students who need to move while learning, including movement breaks periodically throughout the day for all students is going to be helpful. We can be thinking of including flexible seating. So, chairs with rocker bottoms or wobble stools as an option. And students can select these and decide on their own if they want them, if they're useful to them. In my daughter's classroom right now, they have about 50% of the chairs with rocker bottom attachments and 50% without, and that's working out really well. We also need to remember for our students with motor developmental differences that the ways in which we ask our students to express their learning needs to have options as well. So for students with dysgraphia who have difficulty with handwriting, then are there options for students to be able to complete their assignments by typing instead of writing, right? So this is a part of UDL as well. Okay. And now we have a video of a UDL type setup with movement needs while they're learning. And so we can see in that video how that student was provided opportunities to move about in the physical space while looking for different items that started with a different letter. And this is just one easy way that you can set up activities in order to meet students' needs to move while learning. And here we have some ideas for how you can be setting up a communication toolkit so that we're providing multiple means of ways in which students can be taking in and then expressing what they would like to express as part of their communication. Would you like to see that one more time? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about communication here because communication is a sensory process. We take in sensory information of what is being communicated to us, whether that's through oral speech or auditory information, or through writing, or through visuals, or through any other means of input that people might be communicating something to us. And then we have to do the sensory motor process of coordinating our communication output. And again, there are a lot of different ways that any given person may be able to best communicate. So some students will be very strong oral communicators. Some will be better written communicators. Some are going to communicate best using some other alternative or augmentative form of communication, or AAC, right? Now, we're all going to communicate best when we're in a sensory environment that works well for our individual needs, okay? So sensory UDL, all of these things that we've been talking about, thinking about setting up our environments in order to work well for as many students as possible, is supporting your students' communication needs and their communication development. We can be thinking about things like how some students will communicate best in a one-on-one setting. Some are going to be communicating really well when they're in a group and they're feeding off of that energy, right? Some of our students might need more processing time. Once we've communicated some information to them, then it may be that they won't be able to best communicate back to us right in that moment. But if we give them time, if we give them opportunities to communicate back to us in just a little bit, whether that's giving a few more seconds before we jump in again, or whether that's providing opportunities for students who have mastered typing and writing via email to be able to email afterwards with thoughts or questions they're wanting to communicate back to us. And thinking about all of this is a part of what we can do to address something called the double empathy problem. The double empathy problem states that though historically we have considered people with communication disabilities to be the ones who need to improve their communication in order to prevent miscommunications or misunderstandings between themselves and other people, it really is the job of both parties involved to learn about the other person's communication style in order for communication to best be happening.
Okay, So for these fidgets, we will leave them here if you want to stop by and take a look at them. And these metal ones are made by autistic-owned fidget company. It's called Kaiko Fidgets. They're made of bike parts, and they're easy to clean because they're metal. And it would be great if this is accessible to all students. It's available. And then we don't no longer pathologizing our need to have access to fidgets or movement break. And then students, all of them, neurotypical or neurodivergent, will know, because it just becomes part of the classical culture, that you have accessible support and it's there as part of the classroom menu every day. They're going to teach other people, parents, family members, and later co-workers. That's just how it is, right? Okay, so when it comes to changing the narrative towards the social model of disability, the best way is to tell ourselves to use I or we. So we often assume that students who don't speak too much, or because they don't communicate using mouth words, that they don't understand. It's actually the opposite of that. They're actually very thoughtful. They're deep thinkers. They hear and watch everything. So we often also forget to share our perspectives, right? So if a student likes to make a loud screeching noise, to regulate, so we tend to just say, oh, be quiet, please, or, you can go outside for a movement break. But I think what's missing there is an adult guide who say, when you make such a loud noise and I'm not prepared, that really startled me. Autistic and neurodivergent people, contexts don't come to us very easily. So all these teaching methods through verbal channels, those are just words, and we don't know how to apply it, right? So sharing how you feel, your perspectives, and what you would do differently is very helpful. And it takes a lot of practice within the actual context to be able to, for us to get it. It takes longer to develop the muscle memories. So noticing and perceiving, regulating, engaging, expressing. So an example of this would be if you're walking together with your student and your student runs away, you might say, oh my gosh, you're so fast. I'm falling behind. Those are regulating language that your students need to hear, right? Because it's not easy, it's not spontaneous for us to be able to notice those differences when two people are together. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Thank you. Okay, so in conclusion, personalizing of learning experiences is very important for your student. Involve students when you're creating any kind of plans, including IEP goals, as much as possible. If they don't know how to respond, they don't know how to label it, then you work with them. Go through the different experiments. I often bring a bunch of these sensory fidget tools and we play together. And of course, I can observe which ones, the person prefer, right? We already talked about reframing challenging behaviors. It's very important to learn about the why. And remember, sensory profile changes all the time, right? Neurodivergence is a very dynamic disability. So that's why prescription of strategies that's very, very rigid, it's not really helpful because it doesn't go with our mind and what's going on in our body in that moment, right? So help your students to label it, to feel it, to develop the awareness. And if the support are accessible and one day they're going to do it. But if your students are in a mainstream classroom, I think everybody should have those kind of access for communication and sensory support. Movement breaks and ways to move, that's for everyone. It's good for everyone. And educators modeling self-advocacy strategies. So as educators, we forget that we are also, we're tired. We work very hard with our students. And a lot of times that are the way we are dysregulated, we are part of the problems. So acknowledge that, because your students need to hear that today you're very sensitive to sounds or to light, or today you have a headache. They need to hear that, because a lot of times they feel very ashamed thinking that I struggle so much. What's wrong with me? Right? So that's a way for you to just share your experiences, and they can use that, what you model, to describe themselves later. So last one. So this is our emails. That's my nonprofit's a website. So if you have any questions, you can reach us through email.